Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads. Along with Shawn Francis, I'm Brian Altunian, and continuing our conversations over the last few weeks of resources for families who have family members with some special needs issue, medically complex issue, some disability. Today's guests are creators of an amazing organization. We can't wait to talk to them and, again, give access to an amazing resource for families in the special needs community. So stay tuned for another episode of Just Two Dads. It's just so calming. This is our season 4. We're in episode 186, and we changed our, so those who have seen us, we've changed our logo, our look, and we've even changed our theme music, and now it kind of eases into the conversation. I kind of like it. Hey, everybody. I am Brian Altunian, along with it's an NPR tone.
Yeah, like I have to speak in this voice, which will go away.
Along with soft talking Shawn Francis. If you're catching us on our Facebook page, please leave us a comment, share with your friends. If you're catching us after the fact, either on our YouTube channel or on our own website at justtwodadspodcast.com. Please feel free to, like, subscribe, share with your friends. This is me pushing the button of like and subscribe. Share the content with your friends. We think that the folks that we have been able to have conversations with over the last several weeks have been amazing sources of resources that we didn't even realize were available, were out there. And we're engaged in the conversation. And so there's a lot of value with these in these conversations. We hope that you're getting a lot of value out of it. So please let us know in the comments. Send us an email if you'd like at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. We make it kind of easy. wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. If you're catching us on any podcast outlets or down in the U.S. Virgin Islands on WSTX AM radio, thanks for making us part of your listening day. And finally, thank you to Billy Footwear, our partners and friends, and just an amazing company that creates adaptive footwear for people of all ages and of all styles. By the way, the story about Billy Price, the founder, we talk about it all the time because he's an amazing human being, and what the position that he was in and what he overcame to create Billy Footwear. It's an awesome story. So if you click on the link, it'll be in our show notes. If you click on the link, you'll get an additional 15% off of whatever. Even if they have a sale going on, there's additional 15% because we're partners with them. So take advantage, Billy Footwear. All right. Without further ado, I heard on episode 186 in our 4th season of doing this. Shawn and I started this a little over 4 years ago, and we just started the conversation as just two dads of children that had some special needs issues, and the stuff that we were encountering, and where we were in the roles of caregiving, and realized that conversation was something of value to other folks because we started to encounter other people who had experienced some of the same things. Not only that, but in our job as in the financial services world, we did a specially focused effort to provide financial support and financial services to families with special needs. And in those conversations, we kept encountering amazing people who were doing things for the community Shawn and I didn't even know about. And today's guests are yet another great resource for families. And I can't wait to get into the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Shawn. Good morning, Mr. Francis. How you feeling today, buddy?
I feel like it's a broken record, but I really am blessed and grateful, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, the platform that we have. Looking forward to getting into the show. And it always seems like whatever I have going on in life that may be a challenge, sitting here and having these conversations puts it into perspective. And I'm going to share something here that's probably not necessary. Nobody's probably ever noticed it, but if I happen to turn, let's see, not that way, but this way, you'll notice that there's an arm missing here on these glasses. And it's a microcosm of how we see ourselves or how we think other people see us. It's like the 3rd episode where these things are broken, and I've had issues with the pair I'm ordering. So I'm looking at it, I'm like, let me not I was talking to my daughter the other day. She was like, why are you frustrated? I told her about the glasses, and she's like, what do you mean? And I turned, she goes, oh. So anyway, things are never as bad or as odd as they seem.
The crazy thing about that is that until you said it and even turned your head, I didn't even notice. Right?
And that's my whole point,
life,
which we could do an entire episode about that, because I'm convinced that other people are seeing it because I am, but nobody else is. Right?
I totally noticed it, Shawn. I totally
No, you did not.
I did not.
But there are people in our lives who will say, I noticed that flaw, and be and not be truthful, right? So
exactly, right, exactly. That goes back. That's one of the things I say, which is look, the way we see ourselves, the way other people see us is one thing, the way we see the world is another thing, but the way we see ourselves, that is everything, right? So anyway, let us jump right into a fantastic conversation that I'm looking forward to have. Our guests today are people that meet the first qualification for being a hero, which is that they don't see themselves as a hero. But when you consider the service that they provide, the path that led them to that, which is what they will share with us, letting them know about their origins, where they come from, figuratively, literally, emotionally, and geographically, which has everything to do with who they are and what they provide. I'm looking forward to that. Welcome to Just Two Dads, Seth Besse and Lindsay Crane.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome.
So when it comes to the origin, the whole 9 yards, those things, let's start with that, because that has everything to do with, how we face a diagnosis of a loved one, how we come upon the mission to serve others, whatever the case might be. So let's start with that before we get into exactly what your amazing company is and what it does.
Yeah. Lindsay, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So the origin of me, are we talking about like the origin of me before?
Yes. Yeah. Your superpowers first.
Yeah. My superpowers. Well, when I think about how was I brought into the world of disability? For me, that's kind of, really, where I live and breathe. Because I'm also a parent of a 15-year-old, which we'll talk about, who has multiple disabilities. But, we didn't have family members that had disabilities, right? Until, they aged and medical issues came with age. We didn't have people really in our neighborhood that had visible disabilities, right? Looking back, there are definitely, some things I can see, before autism was a word that people were talking about. And then, of course, you go to school where kids are spending, most of their days, and students, especially with more significant support needs, they're not visible. They weren't in our school. They were sent to a separate school. They were segregated. So disability, I didn't have the privilege of being around disabled people growing up, right? Because we didn't have that in our family. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Where did you grow up, Lindsay? What part of the world?
Kansas City. Kansas City. And I will say, as an adult, and of course, because disability wasn't a part of my life, I never stopped to look around and say, hey, where are all the people with disabilities? Because, we know the statistics and they're not here, right? They're being hidden somewhere. And, I didn't have the privilege of having friends, learning about inclusion, learning about, all of, the wonderful diversity that we have, across humanity, because those people, right? People with disabilities, weren't deemed, acceptable to be in our school. I actually have looked it up as an adult. And even though I have nieces and nephews in the same school district, it's the same. They still have segregated schools for students that have more significant support needs. So I really grew up, knowing about disability, but not really thinking about it in any deep way, because I was very sheltered from that. Right. And, cut to then, just growing up and then going to college, I always had an activism, an activist mind. There were a lot of things I was very, politically interested in. And then, like so many people, you go to college and that takes fire. And then I studied journalism. And so I got my bachelor, in journalism. And that's really when, storytelling became a catalyst and a way to bring that advocacy to life in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if you want me to, kind of stop there and then really talk about, what brought me into the disability world, or Seth can talk about his childhood, because yeah, for me, it was basically absent until I became a parent.
And so we'll finish with you, and then Seth, you can follow along the same thing. So Lindsay, where'd you go to school, by the way? Where'd you go to college?
Yeah, Mizzou, University of Missouri, Columbia. So that's where I studied journalism. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then, but you're now out in California now. So your journey that brought you here is how did that happen? How that all happened?
Yeah, I actually always knew that I wanted to work in film. So I studied journalism and came out here after school, not having any contacts or any idea of what that meant. And so for many years, I worked in development and acquisitions. So I bought film scripts, ideas, and, you know, at all stages for distribution in the US that became films and looking for distribution in the US. So that's really what I did. And that's what brought me to California, thankfully, for many reasons now as a parent, how important it is to be in California for the child with disabilities.
And so you got married and had children, and you mentioned your son. Is that the only child you have, or do you have
a daughter? Yes, I have a daughter who's 15, and yes, just one.
Okay, got it. And what's her diagnosis, if you don't mind?
Lena was born almost 2 months early. She had a brain hemorrhage shortly after birth, which resulted in cerebral palsy and multiple disabilities. So, and that includes hearing loss and low vision, which, you know, talk about, you know, a journey. It's constantly a journey, but, you know, she is legally considered deafblind, which is something that we never really realized for all these years, everyone, because she has good residual hearing and vision. And so we were always told, like, oh, that's just for people like Helen Keller, right? Like, you really have to be blind and deaf. So anyway, it's such this journey. We tried to do everything, which I know we're going to be talking about, but like from so early, yet we are always learning. And, you know, you listen to things not realizing, and you're hearing information that's so incorrect, but it sounds right on the surface, right? So, but Lena, she was born, you know, and she came with lots of these warnings of everything that she wouldn't do and that she couldn't do. And Lena is, you know, like, I'm sure your kids, like everyone listening, like your children, we have a very long list of things that people are so certain and so eager to tell you that your children aren't going to do. You know, we had doctors tell us, well, we don't want to tell you anything else because we don't want to give you hope. Right. Because, you know, I don't know, doctors and specialists, you don't tell neurotypical children, right? You don't want to give their parents hope of a future. So my daughter,
not even false hope, but we don't want to give you hope. What kind of evil individual makes it their business to deny another person hope? It's one thing to deny false hope, but we don't want to give you hope in any flavor.
Yeah, that's a neurologist that's still working, that loves to give you all their credentials of everything wonderful they've done.
She must be my neurologist who said the same thing to us 27 years ago, you know. So it's terrible.
No, we were told some really horrible things, that we would be lucky if you know, she would, you know, be able to function at all. And, you know, this is, you know, that she would never be able to walk. You know, by the way, my daughter is walking and running and, you know, doing monkey bars, and you know, her gait may not look like yours or mine, but she's doing it. And she's incredible. She's learning, she's reading, she's included in school. You know, there's lots of challenges, but she has, you know, an incredible life that's obviously very worth living, which is very different than the messages we got, you know, after she was born. You know, everyone talks to you with caution or sometimes a coldness, and then always with the side of like all the things that aren't going to happen, which we promptly threw out the window. So
that's great. Why don't we shift to Seth? Tell us about you. Go ahead.
Before we do, I was going to say, I about an hour ago talked to my daughter, who we were told wasn't going to graduate high school, drive, live alone, do all that stuff. And she is in a hotel this week because she's training. She's an assistant bank manager, a job that she drives to, and looking for apartments in New York. She's absolutely like, she's surpassed every expectation that we were given. And like you, our neurologist did not give us hope. It was all of the things that, you know, and all diagnosed within like 3 minutes of seeing my daughter. Like, you know, literally saw her, then went behind the desk and started typing, you know, all of the things that she had wrong with her in those terms, had wrong. And so basically same kind of situation. So in a way, thank God, because it was a catalyst, and we were parents who were like, you're not going to tell us what our daughter cannot do. So,
Right.
And I just have to say though, too, Brian, how sad and absolutely maddening it is that story, probably every parent we ever meet will have a similar story. And you know, there's so much that needs to be done, obviously, with the ableism in medicine. But anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsay. That was amazing. And again, a very common story that we hear, but great to hear your daughter's path. It sounds very hopeful. Seth, how about you, my friend?
Yeah, so I kind of come into today's conversation with an interesting timing bit. So this morning I just had my first SST meeting with my son's school team, and it was an interesting experience for me because a lot of what we're talking through is what I remember, right? And so it's very much a description of me, which is an interesting part. Sitting in the meeting, talking through everything, and trying to separate what I felt to what I observe with my son is kind of an interesting concept. So I grew up on the East Coast, older sister. I was the younger brother, always a little more running around, physical. She was much more the bookworm than I was. I went through school, kind of moved on, always kind of through elementary school and high school, always a bit behind on kind of reading and writing and all of that. I learned later that when I was a kid, I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. Never knew that growing up. And it was one of those things where kind of similar concept, frankly, to what I felt this morning is when I was getting the diagnosis, apparently, my dad was there saying, yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. That sounds about right. Right. And it was very much, you know, he kind of went through the same thing. And so I went through kind of the majority of my life, not really knowing, but always feeling very self-conscious about reading, about my writing, about my spelling, everything else. And kind of that progression through created a whole bunch of stress for me through kind of the school experience and beyond. So I kept gravitating to things kind of outside of school and so on and so forth. I was lucky enough through a whole bunch of, had a conversation a few weeks ago with a friend and kind of talking through my personal and then now professional career or path. A lot of the things I've done in my life have been a little bit by mistake. And it's funny to look at it that way because there's so much where I operate pretty quickly and I jump into things, and just how that's kind of led through my path, 1, to ending up in California, 2, to ending up kind of where I had kind of the bulk of my, the shaping of my professional career. And then now here at Undivided, all kind of not the most obvious linear path to getting here.
What did you do prior to Undivided? What kinds of, where did that take you?
Yeah. So the bulk of my career has been in legal tech. And so I started in kind of the sales analyst role at a firm early on, kind of looking at patents, looking at patent data, and pretty quickly built that into developing kind of the largest database of patent litigations, patents, and how to evaluate patents. And so slowly kept building a team around it with no experience whatsoever, having no idea what I was doing, but approaching it with the concept of, hey, as a company, this is what we need. And so kept building that out until the point where we built kind of this massive system for lawyers and in-house lawyers at large tech companies to understand the entirety of kind of their technology and patent ecosystem and how they can prepare and mitigate, legal risk for them.
Amazing.
Wow.
Again, considering the diagnosis, the diagnosis of dyslexia. You're like, you're.
Let me ask you this, Seth. You said that it.
Let me hold on.
Go ahead.
I've only not only read patents. I've actually created a couple of patents, and the amount of work that goes into that, that's heroic in and of itself, that you're able to.
No, it makes absolutely no sense that that someone like me has anything to do with that. So yeah,
that's amazing.
It makes even less sense now that I'm writing a bunch of copy and web materials, but we'll leave that.
Well, I got two questions based on that,
awesome.
Which is, you said that at the time of diagnosis, it wasn't told to you, right? So your parents, it seems like they kept it from you to protect you. So the first question is, do you think that helped or hindered you? And then the second question then is, when did you find out and how?
Yeah. So, so certainly as a kid, I remember going to what in hindsight must have been a neuropsych. And I should talk to my parents about that. But I remember going and that concept. And then what I assume happened, and I haven't talked to my parents in detail on this, but what I assume happened is kind of what the school said was, we're probably not going to do anything. And so my parents kind of said, okay, well, let's just keep this moving forward. And my dad, being very much like me, was like, makes sense. I turned out fine. Right. This is, I'm not sure what else he needs. Right. And so I think that was part of it. I didn't really find out, I'll say, until in my 20s. And I was dating a girl in New York who was working at an office where they assess kids for ADHD. And she was like blown away by how off the charts I was. And so she brought this up, and I kind of brought it up in a way to my parents, and they're like, yeah, we know. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was just kind of an interesting conversation that, has as I've moved forward, I've learned more and more about ADHD and dyslexia that kind of explain parts of me that I figured was just me before, not something having to do with kind of how my brain functions.
Yeah. I've never had a diagnosis, and my parents were up front where they would say, okay, let's figure out why this kid can hold these worthy conversations, but when he gets in the ring with academia, he walks out with a black eye all the time and his teeth missing. Why is that? And I just knew I was getting tested and studied and had tutors. I had several teachers that knew our home well, and we knew theirs well, because I was going back and forth outside of class with them trying to help me. And I still had never been diagnosed with anything, and I'm trying to still seek that out. So, but it's, again, like we always say on the show, and it's part of the reason for the impetus of the show, and we didn't even realize it at the time, which is anything that allows you to go, hey, you're not alone. Somebody else is experiencing the same thing. Anything that reminds us of the things that we have more in common than otherwise is completely immeasurable in value. So I think that's really fascinating and fantastic.
Yeah, incredible. And Seth, so you have children. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got to today's earlier conversation.
So I have two wonderful kids, a 5-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. So my 7-year-old's in second grade now, and we're going through the process that a lot of parents are to try and figure out how best to kind of support him through the unique way he needs to learn.
He had a diagnosis.
He did not have a diagnosis. We're just starting this process.
Early stage.
So that's why
okay. So all you know is that something's there.
The conversation.
Yeah.
Well, wow. and that's where really, I mean, Lindsay obviously has a clear pathway to working with Undivided and being at Undivided. Mine's a little less clear. And so the piece, and that's where I get back to kind of that concept of a lot of the twists and turns of my life have partly been by mistake. So Undivided was originally started by two co-founders, John and Jason. Jason has a son with a rare genetic condition that manifests largely as cerebral palsy. And he started Undivided largely out of kind of being shocked at how bad the system of kind of data tracking and all of that was. And both him and John coming out of kind of a successful tech startup themselves, getting into a world for Jason where the state of the art was a 3-ring binder to keep all your documents in. That was kind of the initial concept for where the company came from. And so Jason and John worked on that. I was then introduced into Jason when I was working on other legal tech projects, and really as, hey, Seth, you should talk to these guys. They're working on something really, really interesting and really cool. And I immediately looked at it very much like how I'd looked at the problems I'd been working on in the legal tech space. Of this is an information issue where every parent comes into this. There's no training on it. There's no system to get parents up to speed. There's nothing to hold parents' hands. There's not one source of information parents can go to and trust. Everything's fragmented and splintered all over the world, right? So I looked at it very much as, okay, I've seen this problem before, right? This is an information problem. And so I started working closer and closer with John and Jason until I got to the point of realizing talking to lawyers all day was not nearly as much fun as talking to parents all day. And, you know, looking at this challenge of looking at it as really at its core, an information challenge. It's a really interesting problem to solve. And it's a problem worth solving. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I ended up here. And that's a little bit why I mean by mistake, right? Because this is not, I didn't solely come to this from a personal level. And the interesting thing about me is as I've been here, I've learned a lot more about myself and dyslexia and ADHD than I ever knew before.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, and you know, I'd like to call it an indirect path as opposed to a mistake, because clearly, you know, having you be a part of this and you know, giving access to this, you know, broad scope of information that, you know, whittling it down and narrowing it down to something that will make sense to people, is a huge gift. So, you know, thank God for having you here. So amazing. And let's talk about thank you for sharing that, by the way. Yeah. And, you know, good luck on your path. And again, the nice thing to know is, as you know, as you've clearly come up, you know, I'd say against, but you've seen, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that have shared experiences in all of this. And at least, you know, it's one thing to fight an unknown enemy. It's another thing to fight it with a whole army of folks that have common interests and common background. So thankfully you've got some support around you. And so let's talk about Undivided, the organization, and kind of, you know, what you all do. And at some point, Shawn, you'll throw the page up there. I'll actually post the URL. Here it is. It's undivided.io for those who are listening. Undivided.io. And if you catch us after the fact or watching live, Shawn's going to put the website up. So talk about that a little bit. Actually, either of you wants to go. Yeah.
So the concept for us is we're really the guiding force for parents raising kids with intellectual or developmental disabilities. The whole idea is we help bring parents through the complex and all too often exceedingly overwhelming services that sit between their kids and the care they need, right? And so we're working very hard to make sure that parents can kind of drive the information that they need into action so their kids can get care and services that they need. And kind of at a high level and at our core, how I like to describe it is we're here to make sure that parents can answer 3 key questions, which is, what should I do for my child? How do I do it? And who can help me? And what do I mean by that? And so the concept of what should I do for my child is every parent that gets a diagnosis that kind of starts trying to access care and services for their kids is starting totally from scratch, right? There's no handbook, there's no manual, there's no roadmap that anyone's put out that parents can kind of get that information they need. And so when I first started working with Undivided more closely, and Lindsay obviously can echo this, there's so much luck involved in parents finding those key aspects that made a massive difference in their family or their kids' lives. And there doesn't need to be, right? And so what we need to do is make sure that parents can get that information more quickly. And so
I'm sorry, I just have to let you know. I usually when we bring a website up of a guest, you scroll down and everything. If you notice, I'm stuck right here because there's two things that just jump out at me. One, it says, what government benefits are you missing? Then it says it could be more than you expect, learn more. But then when you click on the dots at the bottom, the first one is public benefits. The next one is education. Then after that, there's medical. And then on top of that, there's then general. That's tremendous. That's tremendous. Just sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I think the key part of it is that what we're trying to do is bring all of this under one roof, right? There's so many silos in this space where, a medical professional has a very clinical lens that they're looking through, right? They have no idea what should happen at school and no idea what should happen in the public benefits realm. Someone in the public benefits realm in California, a service coordinator at the regional center, may not understand clinical stuff at all. They may not understand school stuff at all, right? They're really just focused on their piece, right? And it's the same concept at the school. And so what ends up happening is parents end up, if they find some source of information that's good on kind of any one of those things, that's where most of their focus ends up. And in reality, what kids and families need is all of those working in concert, right? And that's where kind of the whole magic happens. And that's really what we're doing through our product and our application, right? And so the whole idea is that we start by building out a roadmap for families so that, great, when they get a diagnosis, what are the key kind of milestones that we're going to work on them with? What are the benefits that are available to them, right? And, for example, we operate in California, right? So many parents are missing out on key programs to the extent that on average, the families that we work with, we're uncovering $30,000 a year that they had no idea existed, right?
Wow.
So that kind of thing. And part of it is because no one's there to tell them that it exists. And then no one's there to help them through that process that kind of so many parents give up on the way because the process is anything but linear, anything but consistent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I have,
I was
just going to say, I have an observation, then a question. So that's very much like our son Elijah wore pull-ups longer than most kids did. And I've given shared this before. We were paying out of pocket for pull-ups for, I'm not sure exactly how many years, but a handful of them before we realized that the regional center would not only pay for them, but have them delivered to our door. So that's just one of many benefits that we have here in California that many people aren't necessarily aware of, but people that are come here for some of those things. And you can't get these benefits if you don't ask. Most people aren't going to just tell you, but if you don't know to ask. So it's kind of a catch-22. My question is, as I'm looking at your site, because I was just on there getting ready to register, it asks, the first thing, it says, I am a, and there's several options: parent of an adult living with child living with disabilities, adult living with one or more disability. But the first one is of a child 18 years or younger with a disability. Now, based on the other questions, your services build a bridge between families with members who are diagnosed at 18 and older as well as younger, correct?
So right now we're really focused on kind of birth to 18 or birth to 22.
Okay.
And the reason for that, frankly, is not that there isn't help that needs to happen after that. There certainly is, right? It's just frankly, the amount of information that we can condense and get together. We started here. And so as the families that we're working with, their kids are getting older, right? We're using that to populate kind of that next set of information and make sure it's centralized. And kind of the key component that we use to go through this is everything that we do is designed from the standpoint of moving a child into more and more services that they need, right? And so every piece of content, every article that Lindsay and her team writes is written with that direct response. And so the more families that we work with, the better that process works, because we are able to create more and more content, more and more information, more and more systems that are directly designed to move that family forward.
Yeah. I was going to say, you know, Lindsay, you mentioned, I think before we got on the air, Kelly Coleman. For those of you who have seen our episode with Kelly, she's an author, a mom. Her book is Everything. I had to write. Oh, look it up. Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child: Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Support. And I think, Seth, to what you're saying, and there it is. There's the book right there. And Shawn had an opportunity to actually contribute to that book as well. And what you're saying is that, you know, there are so many silos. Like so that's a resource that's very broad and general. Yet, honestly, and Lindsay, a content person, like I think there's opportunity for us to do, you know, remember when Chicken Soup for the Soul came out, and then it was Chicken Soup for teenagers and Chicken Soup for all these varieties. Now you could do a guide and content for each, you know, silo, as you mentioned, Seth, because to the point, all the things that you're saying, how you deal with a child with cerebral palsy versus a child with autism, there's some overlap, but there's also distinct differences and, you know, and issues and areas of support. So we're getting broad, and then we get, you know, narrow again. And I just think that there's just tremendous opportunity with what you provide families, and, you know, so much information that it can be overwhelming for some families, and being able to narrow it down to the area specific focus, those things that are available.
And I think kind of the key piece that we're working on is not just the information, but it's how that information relates to you, right? And that's where our application and our account that sits behind it tailors that information to a distinct parent, right? And if you think about all the trainings that are out there, it's way too much information for any parent to consume, and especially remember, take notes on any of that, right? And so our whole system is designed to allow someone, if they want, great, they can get the full breadth and work on stuff themselves that way, or they can bring pieces in and kind of optimize as they go so that it's not as overwhelming, and they can take the high level stuff that, you know, is a little easier to find, customize it down to their own needs, and so that it's clear, actionable steps for them.
Well,
Amazing.
And yeah, and like Seth, and like you were saying as well, Brian, that there's, I guess, the curse and the blessing of there's so much information out there. And depending on your personality, I mean, and you know, and you can go and you can take all of this in, but then it's really left up to the parent to figure out, okay, how do I make this actionable? What do I do next? I'm looking here for education. I'm looking here for regional center. I'm looking here for Medi-Cal, right? Everything is all over the place. And then you have to figure out how that really relates to you and your life. And so that has been, you know, what our content team, you know, my team is figuring out, like, what are the questions that parents are asking? It's a lot more than you can Google. As we all know, if it was as easy as like going to a training or looking and see what the laws are, we all know that, you know, and those are like best scenarios. It's not what's happening on the ground. So how do we really build content and roadmaps to help parents answer the questions that that they already have, or they didn't know they were supposed to be asking? Because, you know, one of our favorite phrases, and it's always like, you don't know what you don't know. And so you can have parents coming and saying, I have no idea where to start. Or you can have parents coming and saying, I need help with this issue, not knowing that there's all of these things, like Seth saying, whether that's $30,000, whether that's IHSS, whether they heard misinformation that, you know, their family wouldn't, you know, be eligible for that, or, you know, whether they didn't know about the pull-ups, like you were talking about, Shawn. There's so much out there. Even when you think you have a handle on things, you don't know what you're missing a lot of the time, because how could you? I mean, there's so much in all of these systems. And so we're really looking to, yep, we have articles that anyone can access. And then, then we further break those down into step-by-step how-tos of like, and like we were talking about before, the macro and the micro, right? There's like, how do you apply for regional center? And then it's like, okay, what's your zip code? This is how you apply to your regional center, because how it looks here is not how it looks here. And so we're really trying to, like Seth said, take what are the priorities of the family? What are you looking at as a family? What is your, what are you dealing with? What's on fire right now? And then we can breathe a little, and we have that under wraps, at least for the minute. Then like, let's talk about what comes next, because I think for families, that's what's so scary, right? Like, there's so much going on you're dealing with, sometimes just trying to get through the day that I sure gets lost.
Sure. I was going to say, I'd like to try and, be a product of the product, a person of my word, so to speak. So as an advocate between the work we do with financial services, the groups that I belong to, groups I've run, being on the board, the Autism Parents Advisory Board, Children's Hospital of LA, all this stuff, I'm supposed to be in the know and all these things, but I'm finding that you generally can't ever stop learning. Our son Elijah is turned 18 in May and graduated high school. And there's a big milestone and everything. But with the beginning of the school year, we are finding that we feel like we're going through another diagnosis. And as a proactive person, what I've done to look to address some of the stuff that we're going through with regard to his anxiety and things of that sort is, I'm going to share the screen again, because I went to register at the site. And when I went to register, it says, this email is already in use. So I didn't even realize that I had registered at the site. And as you can see here, it says, welcome, Shawn. And I guess I didn't even realize that I signed up in August. So we're so busy doing what we do. So nothing's going to be held against anyone that doesn't take action. But I'm encouraging you to do that, because I'm going to try and find out for myself exactly what kind of resources are available that I, Mr. supposed to know it, might not know about, because the life in this space is just not only one gigantic onion, but an onion that seems to continue growing as quickly as the layers get peeled off. And between that and the notion that we need to be reminded that we're not alone, I encourage you to go ahead and take a look and get on there and see exactly what it is you can find out for yourself. Go ahead, Brian.
It feels like, Lindsay, what you were just describing it's almost like a choose your adventure kind of play, right? Because because here's the other thing, parents, we're going through our own stuff, right? And, as we go through this information and we think of like, how does this, how much time, Shawn's a perfect example. How much time do I have to devote to this? Does this serve the family? Does it serve my child? Does it serve, right? And then, how much can I take in and take on? And so being able to kind of, be selective in how you navigate through this, the fact that you guys provide that kind of support is absolutely amazing. And I think it's choose your own adventure, because every time you turn, you're going down a different path, and then you have other decisions to make. It's a massive decision tree, right?
I use that analogy all the time, Brian, or
That's
Candyland, awesome. Or like the choose your own adventure, right? Because what's right for one family is, completely is different, right, for another family, even if their children are presenting the same. And what is missing so much in this space, and what we take really seriously, is meeting families where they are. What do you have on your plate? What are you ready for? Like, and it's our job just to say, like, this is what's ahead. You let us know when you're ready. We have navigators who are also parents who can work with families one-to-one. And, then we also have, an avenue where they can just use our platform and our software, and they can go at their own pace. And so it really is taking into consideration the families, instead of so much of what we all face, which is acting like there's one way for you to do it. And if you don't do it this way, you're going to miss out. And that's all there is.
Yeah.
And there's so much in family dynamics. And like Seth, you've got at the moment, as we know, a neurotypical child along with a a child that has, some neurodiversity. And so how does that come into play, right? How do siblings come into play? What happens if the parents get divorced, and how does that happen? What happens for the child and the support, and, grandparents and, support structures around. Everybody has a different experience through all of this. And so being able to, again, have some navigation is incredibly helpful.
Well, and I think we've talked about it a couple of times of feeling like you're not alone in this, right? Yeah. A lot of this is like, we all have our own journey and our own experience, and kind of choose your own adventure. But at the same time, the things that you're experiencing and trying to work on with your child and get for your child is something that someone else is going to experience or has experienced in the past, right? Yeah. And that may not be someone in your school district, right? It may be someone that's a little farther away. And so the learnings that you go through as a parent of how you overcame that, how you worked through that, are often lost, right? And that's why what we're doing is so important in bringing all of these experiences into a central place, so that parents everywhere can learn about how that was overcome for Shawn, right? And they can learn about that for years to come. And we don't have to step back and keep ratcheting backwards and having people learn it from scratch.
Yeah. And I just have to say, because this is another one of our favorite analogies, is the waiting room analogy of like, where, if you think, Shawn and Brian, like some of the most important sort of what felt like life altering kind of like moments that you learned something about your child, 9 times out of 10, it comes from another parent. And so, and then when you think about how that happened, it goes back to the luck. And you think, oh my gosh, if I wouldn't have met that one parent in that waiting room of that therapy room and all of the, millions of therapy rooms that we are in, if I wouldn't have ran into that one person that one day, how would I have not heard about this doctor or this therapy or this approach or this service? And so we really are looking to take the luck out of access, because that's what it feels like. So many of these things come because you happen to meet the right person. And so, and then eventually maybe you would find that same answer, but how long is that going to take, right? And how many years has your child missed out on what they need?
It's so funny you said that. Again, our diagnosis was 27 years ago, when there was not a lot of support. And in fact, our neurologist used the term microcephaly, which didn't mean anything. It's like saying I have a cold. It literally means small head, which points to developmental delays. And we went online, and I joke about this all the time on the show. I said, we went on to Prodigy. That was the internet access at the time. And looked up microcephaly and discovered this phenomenal support group who told us about early intervention and regional center. The doctor never even said that that's what we had available to us. And there was nowhere to go we didn't have anybody in our circle that had any of this experience. So thankfully, we found the support group that mentioned that stuff and put us on a path to support. But to your point, like, if you don't know where to go, what do you do? The reality is that now we've got so many resources available. And that's why we, again, are so excited to have you guys on the show today, because what a tremendous resource for families now is to be able to not only know that there's stuff out there, but there's pathways that they specifically can choose to support their loved one. That's really, it's an amazing service that you guys are providing. So kudos to you. It's
wow.
Awesome.
I say this every week, and time is about perspective. It doesn't really move any faster or slower.
I know what you're gonna say.
This
feels the same.
But this
right?
one feels like it's gone by faster than any other. It goes by so fast.
How does that happen? Like, seriously.
I guess time just really does fly when you're having fun, because
or when you're getting older. My husband reminds me of this. He's like, time goes faster as we get older. Maybe.
I made a post the other day, and I said, you have to be of a certain age to even appreciate this in terms of perspective of time. But if you think of the years from 19, this is to show you how quickly 20 years can go by in terms of perception. If you think of the year 1980 to the year 2000, for me, I think of 1980. That's the year Prince's album Dirty Mind came out. That's the year that Michael Jackson's Off the Wall kind of really took off. That's the year that Magic Johnson was a rookie. And that was one year I attended a boarding school in North Carolina. The distance between then to 1990 is it seems like a fairly long time, but it's 10 years. Then when you go from 90 to 2000, that seems like it's 5 seconds long. You know, it goes by so fast. But we are at the point in the show where we ask the following question. Our ability to make the world a better place is tied greatly to our willingness or ability to make ourselves better, to change ourselves. With that said, give us one example, each of you, if you will, of a thought or a belief that you once believed strongly, but no longer believe to be true. And as we've discussed before, there's no right or wrong answer. This is all based on your perspective. Even if the answer is there is no change, that's fine too.
All right, Seth, I'll let you take it first.
Oh, okay. Got it. So
generous.
Thinking through this, it's kind of it's an interesting question, and it's not something where I feel like I've had an epiphany moment where opinions have kind of changed and shaped. I think thinking through it and kind of where we are as a culture, as a country, as a company and a team, the thing that continually highlights to myself as being more and more and more important is diversity broadly. And so what I mean by that is diversity of opinions, diversity of conversations, diversity of experiences, right? All of that together, I think, we've kind of, you don't see that when you're younger, and you start to see it as you get older and older. And where we are, I think, kind of in our world, people get more and more siloed and less diversity. And so it's like, as we think about how we kind of move into this next generation, that is truly what moves things along. And we talked about it earlier. We all have our own path, and it's the coming together and sharing of those paths that makes things move forward more quickly and more effectively.
Love that.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Lindsay?
I mean, for me, I guess I think about how I've evolved, and that really hugely goes back to my daughter and being in her world and taking her lead. My personality is one where I want to plan. I'm like, go, go, go. I feel like, I'm very entrenched in systemic change as well. And so if I'm waking up, there's very little, I guess I should say there's so much with our children that we can't control, that's out of our control. And so in order to feel less helpless, I want to plan, I want to jump in. How are we trying to change the systems? What's broken? What do we need to do? What kind of change, and so it's always kind of going, right. And patience is not one of my greatest virtues. And so, but then being, a parent in general, and then, again, being in Lena's world, right. You feel like you're hurrying up and waiting. And so I guess being Lena's mom constantly reminds me about appreciating being in the moment, right? Because if I'm always looking to what are we trying to do? What are we trying to change? What needs to be done? Then I have to continuously work about being in the moment and appreciating what's happening right now. So I'm not working towards, this better future without enjoying and appreciating right now and just slowing down enough. And one thing, a huge gift that she's given me too is, appreciating the big and the small always, right? Because our families understand, like, we celebrate things that other families might think like, what's the big deal there, right? Like, what's that, right? They don't understand that somebody doing therapy, the difference in doing something and being able to move a finger is the difference between communication with everyone, right? Think about how people, or with an eye gaze, it's just the slightest movement, something like that is actually, completely life-changing for an individual. So, my appreciation, I do not take things for granted. Like, I mean, we all do, right? We all do. It's an unfortunate part of the human condition. But, you know, when I look at before versus now, I mean, the appreciation of so many things. And like you were saying, Seth, the true deep appreciation of all kinds of diversity and life experiences. I feel like I can, you know, I appreciate that in a completely different way. So I really have so much of a deeper outlook of life and my own life through the eyes of my daughter.
Beautiful. It's a little bit like I take what you said, and that's just being present in the moment and taking in what it is and the beauty for what it is. You know, right. Whatever that experience is.
Exactly.
Because it's changing. So that's beautiful. I love that. Well, this has been an amazing experience for us. And so glad that we were able to have this conversation and furthering our engagement together at some point, you know. So we'll continue to promote and talk about what you're doing. I know we're going to see each other, or we're going to see somebody from your group on Sunday at a live event. And so as much as we can to help spread the word about your amazing organization, we're going to do that. So thank you both for being here today. And as we say our thanks and our goodbyes for the day, I just want to again thank everybody who joined us on Facebook and, you know, put a little love up there. Appreciate you. And if you're catching us after the fact on either our YouTube channel or at our website at just2dadspodcast.com, thank you for your help supporting us and spreading the word, and again talking about these amazing individuals and this great organization that they represent. Spread the word. We need more help. And then lastly, I'll just say, you know, thank you to Billy Footwear as well. Appreciate you, Billy, and all the work that you're doing. Shawn's put the URL up on the screen. It'll be in our show notes as well. Get that 15% off. As I always say at the end of the show, empathy and love is always, you know, it's always important. Be empathetic. You never know what somebody's going through. Have some empathy. You don't know where they've come from, where they're going, what's happening. So rather than being judgmental, have some empathy for the folks around you. And if you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world's just a much better place. So with that, love you both. Thank you for being here. I'm going to throw it to Shawn to sign us off. And what a great episode. Love this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth and Lindsay, again for a wonderful conversation and great time spent. And just a reminder, Brian mentioned our website, just2dadspodcast.com. When you go to that site, you'll find an opportunity to register for our men's group, The Den. The registration link can be found at that page as well. As men, we're not encouraged to share our hopes, fears, emotions, and concerns. The Den is a safe place to do just that. We believe that better men make a better world. And we need to make sure that we encourage and uplift each other as much as we possibly can. And keep in mind, this is coming from someone who, when I first was offered the opportunity to be in a men's group, which is the impetus for that a couple of years beforehand, my thought was, that's a bunch of dudes sitting around a campfire trying to figure out who can push out a beer the fastest and who's got the biggest kill. That's not me. Was I ever wrong? Because if parents or fathers or caregivers of neurotypical individuals need a safe place to express themselves, then so too, and even more so, do those who are parents or caregivers to someone with special needs. Keep in mind that we should just be a little bit more childlike, less childish. Questions are more powerful than statements. Everybody needs the same thing: to be seen, loved, heard, know that they matter. To each and everyone within the sound of my voice, thank you so much. And if you're hearing this, we love you.
Thank you, guys. See you next week.
Thanks,
Just Two Dads.